Some wounds never heal, especially the ones between brothers who let pride destroy their family. Sheriff Clint Harrow learned this the hard way when two bloodied wolfdogs stumbled into his town, carrying a message from the brother he'd lost forever. These weren't just any dogs. They belonged to Samuel Harrow, dead 3 months now, and Clint hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. The animals collapsed at his feet, their golden eyes pleading for help he should have given his brother long ago. Everyone in Perdition Ridge whispered about mountain spirits and outlaws, but Clint knew better. His brother's homestead sat empty in the Pine Hills, yet something had happened up there. Something violent enough to send these loyal creatures down the mountain, bleeding and broken, searching for the one man who might understand. What had Samuel been hiding in his final days? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Sheriff Clint Harrow knelt beside the wounded animals, his weathered hands gentle despite their trembling. At 58, he'd seen enough blood and suffering to last 3 lifetimes. But something about these creatures struck him deeper than any crime scene ever had. The larger wolf dog, a magnificent beast with silver-streaked fur, wore a collar he recognized, worn leather with brass studs that their father had crafted 40 years ago. Perdition Ridge had always been a town that time forgot. Nestled in the Montana hills where the mining boom had died as quickly as it began. Main Street stretched barely 4 blocks, lined with weathered storefronts that had seen better decades. The Copper Dollar Saloon still served whiskey to the handful of ranchers and drifters who called this place home, while Martinez's general store provided everything from ammunition to aspirin. Most of the original buildings stood empty now, their windows dark as dead eyes, watching over a community that survived on stubbornness and shared history. Clint had been sheriff here for 23 years, long enough to know every resident's troubles and secrets. Well, most of them. He'd taken the badge after his stint in the army, thinking small-town law would be simpler than the complexities he'd left behind in distant conflicts. In many ways, it had been, until moments like this reminded him that some wounds ran deeper than any battlefield injury. Jesus, Clint, what happened to these poor creatures? Doc Martinez emerged from his clinic across the street, his medical bag already in hand. Roberto Martinez had been the town's doctor, veterinarian and unofficial counselor for 30 years. A compact man with gentle eyes and steady hands that had delivered half the children in Perdition Ridge. Found them like this outside my office, Clint replied, though that wasn't entirely true. The dogs had sought him out specifically, limping down Main Street in the pre-dawn darkness as if they knew exactly where to find help. They belonged to Samuel. Doc Martinez paused in his examination of the smaller dog's wounded leg. Everyone in town knew about the Harrow brothers' estrangement, though most were too polite to mention it directly. Samuel's been dead 3 months, Clint. I know. The words came out harder than intended. Samuel's funeral had been a sparse affair. A handful of townspeople and Clint standing awkwardly at the back of the cemetery, too proud and too late for the reconciliation that would never come. His brother had died alone of a heart attack in his cabin, or so Doc Martinez had determined. Clint hadn't even known Samuel was sick. The larger wolf dog whimpered, and Clint noticed something protruding from its mouth, paper, torn and blood-stained. He carefully extracted what appeared to be pages from a journal, the writing smudged but recognizable. Samuel's careful script, the same handwriting that had once left notes in their secret childhood hiding places. November 15th, Clint read aloud, his voice catching slightly. They're watching the cabin again. 3 men on horseback staying just beyond the tree line. I can feel their eyes on me when I tend the garden. Something's not right about this. The old mine. They keep asking questions about the old mine. Doc Martinez looked up from bandaging the smaller dog's wounds. What mine? Clint's throat tightened. The family silver mine, closed since their father's death 15 years ago, had been a source of bitter contention between the brothers. Samuel had wanted to keep working it, believing there was still silver to be found. Clint had insisted they sell the claim, split the money, and move on with their lives. The argument had escalated into accusations and old grievances until neither brother could stand to be in the same room. "There's more," Clint continued reading. "November 18th, found fresh boot prints near the mine entrance. Someone's been digging around up there. I think they know about the—" The page was torn off mid-sentence, stained with what looked like dried blood. The morning crowd began to gather as word spread through town. Kate Sullivan emerged from the copper dollar, wiping her hands on her apron. At 45, she'd been running the saloon since her husband died in a mining accident 8 years ago, serving as unofficial town councillor and keeper of local gossip. Her auburn hair showed threads of silver now, but her green eyes remained sharp and kind. "Samuel's dogs?" she asked, crouching beside Clint. Her fingers found the larger animal's head, stroking gently. "Poor things. They've been through hell. You know about the dogs?" Clint looked at her with surprise. Kate had always been friendly with everyone in town, but he hadn't realized she'd maintained contact with Samuel. A flush colored her cheeks. "He'd stop by sometimes for supplies. Never said much, but he was always kind to me. Talked about these two like they were his children." She paused, studying Clint's face. "He talked about you sometimes, too." The admission hit Clint like a physical blow. "What did he say?" "That he missed his little brother. That he wished things had been different between you two." Kate's voice softened. "He kept that letter you never answered on his mantelpiece. The one from 5 years ago, when you tried to reach out after Dad's anniversary." Clint remembered that letter, a clumsy attempt at reconciliation that had taken him 3 drafts to write. He'd poured his regrets and apologies onto paper, then waited months for a response that never came. The silence had felt like rejection, confirming his worst fears about Samuel's feelings toward him. He never got it. Kate continued gently. "It came back marked return to sender. The address you had was old. He'd moved to the cabin by then." The revelation struck Clint like lightning. 5 years of renewed silence, of assuming his brother had rejected his overture when Samuel had never even received the letter. 5 years of missed opportunities, of stubbornly waiting for the other to make the first move. Mayor Thompson approached, his considerable bulk moving with surprising speed. Harold Thompson had run Perdition Ridge's municipal affairs for 12 years, a position that mostly involved arguing with the county about road maintenance and filing paperwork for the handful of businesses that remained. His political ambitions had always exceeded the town's needs, but he was generally harmless. "Sheriff, what's all this commotion?" Thompson's eyes darted nervously between the wounded animals and the growing crowd. "People are starting to talk about mountain spirits and such nonsense. Just a couple of hurt animals, Harold. Nothing supernatural about it." Clint folded the journal pages carefully and slipped them into his shirt pocket. Something in the mayor's manner seemed off. Too eager, too interested in details that should have been routine. Doc Martinez finished his examination and stood slowly. "They'll live, but they've been through trauma. These aren't wild injuries, Clint. Someone did this deliberately. Look at the pattern of cuts on their legs. This was meant to slow them down, not kill them." The implication hung heavy in the morning air. Someone had hurt Samuel's dogs intentionally, possibly to prevent them from reaching town or carrying whatever message they bore. The torn journal pages suggested Samuel had been investigating something dangerous, something that might have gotten him killed. "I need to ride up to Samuel's place," Clint announced, already mentally preparing for the journey he'd avoided for 3 months. The cabin sat 5 miles up winding mountain trails, in country he'd once known, as well as his own backyard. "Clint, maybe you should wait," Thompson interjected quickly. "There's been talk of drifters in the hills, dangerous men. Could be they're the ones who hurt these animals? All the more reason to investigate." Clint's tone brooked no argument. He'd spent 20 years avoiding his brother's homestead, 20 years letting pride and old wounds fester. These dogs had risked their lives to bring him a message from beyond the grave. The least he could do was listen. Kate touched his arm gently. "I'll take care of them while you're gone. They can stay at the saloon. I've got space out back." "Thank you." The words came easier than expected. Kate had always been kind to him, offering quiet companionship during the long evenings when the weight of his mistakes felt heaviest. He'd never pursued the attraction he felt toward her, convinced that a man who couldn't even maintain a relationship with his own brother had no business trying to build something with someone else. As the crowd dispersed and Doc Martinez finished treating the animals, Clint studied the journal pages again. Samuel's handwriting revealed growing paranoia in his final weeks, mentions of watchers and questions about the old mine. Whatever his brother had stumbled onto, it'd been serious enough to get him killed, and important enough that someone was still willing to hurt innocent animals to keep it secret. The larger wolfdog looked up at him with those intelligent golden eyes, and Clint saw an echo of Samuel's stubbornness in the animal's gaze. These creatures had traveled miles through dangerous country, wounded and exhausted, to deliver their master's final message. They'd succeeded where 20 years of human pride had failed. They'd brought the Harrow brothers together again, even if one of them was beyond conversation. "I'll find out what happened to him," Clint whispered to the dog, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise." The animal's tail thumped once against the dusty ground, as if it understood. For the first time in months, Clint felt a sense of purpose beyond the routine duties that had defined his existence in Perdition Ridge. His brother had left him a mystery to solve, a final chance to honor the bond they'd once shared as children exploring the mountain trails together. Whatever Samuel had discovered up at the old mine, whatever had gotten him killed, Clint would uncover the truth. He owed his brother that much. And perhaps in solving this final puzzle, he might find a way to forgive himself for 20 years of stubborn silence. The torn journal pages crackled in Clint's weathered hands as he spread them across his desk, trying to piece together the fragments of his brother's final days. Doc Martinez had cleaned the blood away as best he could, but the rusty stains remained, a grim reminder of the violence that had driven Samuel's loyal companions down from the mountains. November 20th, one legible entry began. "Can't shake the feeling I'm being hunted. Found my gate open again this morning, fresh tire tracks in the mud. Someone's been through my things while I was in town. They're looking for something, but what? The old man never told us everything about the mine. Maybe there's more down there than we ever knew." Clint's chest tightened at the reference to their father. Old Henrik Harrow had been a secretive man, prone to muttering about family legacies and hidden treasures that his sons had dismissed as the ramblings of a stubborn Norwegian immigrant. Henrik had worked the silver mine for 30 years, pulling enough ore to keep the family fed, but never striking the mother lode. He'd always insisted was down there somewhere. Another fragment, barely readable. November 23rd, they came right to the cabin today. 3 men, well armed, asking questions about mining claims and property deeds. Told them the mine was played out years ago, but they didn't believe me. One of them had a scar across his left cheek, spoke with a city accent, said they represented interested parties who might want to purchase the claim. When I refused, he smiled like a snake. I don't think they're going to take no for an answer. The hair on Clint's neck stood up. Samuel had been threatened, possibly multiple times, in the weeks before his death. Yet Doc Martinez's examination had found no signs of violence on the body, just the still heart of a man who'd apparently died in his sleep. But what if Samuel's heart attack hadn't been natural? What if someone had found a way to kill him without leaving obvious marks? The largest piece of journal page contained Samuel's most disturbing entry. November 28th, I was right about the mine. Found the entrance to the old shaft Dad always kept sealed. Someone's been working down there recently, modern equipment, fresh digging. There's silver down there, more than we ever imagined. No wonder those men were so interested in the claim. But there's something else, something Dad hid from us. Found his old journal behind loose stones in the mine office. He knew about this vein all along, but he was scared of it. Wrote about cursed silver and blood money. Don't know what he meant, but I'm starting to understand why he never wanted to dig deeper. Maybe some secrets are better left buried. Clint leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. Their father had known about a rich silver vein, but had deliberately kept it secret, even from his own sons. Samuel had discovered this hidden wealth and had been murdered for it. Clint was now certain his brother's death was no accident. But who had killed him? And why were they still interested in the mine now that Samuel was dead? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Kate Sullivan stood in the doorway, her face drawn with concern. "The dogs are resting comfortably," she said, then hesitated. "Clint, I need to tell you something about Samuel. Something I probably should have mentioned earlier." He gestured for her to sit, noting the way she twisted her hands nervously in her lap. Kate had always been forthright, sometimes brutally honest. Whatever she was struggling to say must be significant. Samuel didn't just stop by the saloon for supplies, she began slowly. He'd been asking questions about the town's history, especially about mining claims and property deeds. He seemed to think someone was trying to cheat him out of something that rightfully belonged to your family. What kind of questions? About who had access to county records, who might know about old mining surveys, that sort of thing. He was particularly interested in whether anyone had been asking about the Harrow family claim. Kate paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Clint, I think your brother was scared. Really scared. The last time I saw him, about 2 weeks before he died, his hands were shaking when he tried to light his cigarette. Samuel was never a nervous man. The picture was becoming clearer and more troubling. Samuel had discovered valuable silver deposits on the family land and had been systematically threatened by people who wanted access to that wealth. His investigation had made him a target, and ultimately it had cost him his life. "There's something else," Kate continued. "Mayor Thompson was asking about Samuel too, right around the same time. Wanted to know if he'd been talking to anyone about selling his property, whether he'd seemed interested in relocating. At the time, I thought Harold was just being his usual nosy self. But now it seems like more than idle curiosity." Clint felt the familiar weight of his service weapon against his hip, a comforting reminder that he wasn't completely defenseless against whatever forces had killed his brother. Did Thompson seem nervous about Samuel's activities? Nervous might be too strong a word, but definitely interested. More interested than he should have been in a hermit's business dealings? Kate leaned forward, her green eyes intense. "Clint, what if Samuel's death wasn't natural? What if someone wanted him dead because of what he'd discovered?" The same suspicion had been growing in Clint's mind since he'd read the journal entries. Samuel's heart attack might have been induced. There were drugs that could cause cardiac arrest without leaving obvious traces. Substances that would be virtually undetectable unless someone knew specifically what to look for. The question was whether Doc Martinez had been thorough enough in his examination, or whether he'd simply assumed a 56-year-old hermit had died of natural causes. "I need to see Samuel's body," Clint said grimly. Kate paled. "He was cremated 3 days after the funeral, Clint. Harold Thompson insisted it was what Samuel would have wanted, said it was more economical for the county. Doc Martinez didn't object. Another convenient detail that eliminated potential evidence. If Samuel had been murdered, his killers had covered their tracks well, ensuring that no forensic examination would be possible after the fact. The cremation effectively closed any possibility of determining whether his death had been natural. Clint gathered the journal pages carefully, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. 20 years of silence had deprived him of his brother's company, but it had also left Samuel isolated and vulnerable when he'd needed family support most. If Clint had swallowed his pride and reached out, if he'd been there when Samuel needed him, his brother might still be alive. "I'm riding up to the cabin this afternoon," he announced. "Samuel left these pages for a reason. There might be more evidence up there. Something that will help us understand what really happened. Clint, if you're right about Samuel being murdered, then whoever killed him might still be watching the property. It could be dangerous." He stood and checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded. "Then they'll discover that killing one Harrow brother doesn't make the other one go away. Samuel was investigating something important enough to die for. I owe it to him to finish what he started." Kate rose as well, her face set with determination. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." If this is as dangerous as we think, then you'll need someone watching your back." Her tone brooked no argument. "Samuel trusted me enough to confide some of his fears, and I've lived in these mountains my whole life. I know the country around your family's claim as well as anyone." Clint wanted to refuse, to protect her from whatever danger awaited at Samuel's cabin, but he also recognized the wisdom in her words. Kate was tough, level-headed, and familiar with the terrain. More importantly, she'd been one of the last people to speak with Samuel alive. Her insights might prove crucial to understanding what had happened. "We leave in 2 hours," he conceded. "Bring your rifle and enough supplies for an overnight stay. If we're walking into a trap, I want to be prepared for whatever we might find." As Kate left to make her preparations, Clint sat alone with his brother's final words, feeling the weight of 20 years' worth of regrets settling on his shoulders. Samuel had died alone, frightened and surrounded by enemies, while his only living relative had been too proud to bridge the gap between them. The journal pages represented more than just evidence of a crime. They were Samuel's last attempt to reach out, to share the burden of whatever he'd discovered. The torn, blood-stained fragments had traveled miles in the mouth of a wounded animal, carried by creatures whose loyalty had outlasted their master's life. Whatever Samuel had found in the old mine, whatever secret their father had tried to keep buried, Clint would uncover the truth. He owed his brother that much, and perhaps in solving this mystery, he might find some measure of redemption for the years they'd lost to stubborn silence. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows as Clint prepared for the journey that would take him back to the family homestead for the first time since his father's funeral. Samuel's cabin waited in the pine-covered hills, holding secrets that had proven deadly to discover but might be even more dangerous to leave buried. The wounded wolfdogs had delivered their message, and now it was time for Clint to honor their sacrifice by finishing the investigation that had cost Samuel his life. Whatever waited for him in those mountain shadows, whatever truth lay hidden in the depths of the old silver mine, he would face it with the courage his brother had shown in his final days. The Harrow family had secrets worth killing for, and Clint intended to uncover every one of them, no matter what the cost. The mountain trail to Samuel's cabin wound through stands of lodgepole pine and aspen that Clint remembered from childhood adventures. Every bend in the path triggered memories he'd spent 20 years trying to suppress, he and Samuel racing their horses through these same woods, competing to see who could find the most interesting rocks or animal tracks, sharing dreams about the treasures that might lie hidden in their father's mysterious mine. Kate rode beside him on a steady mare, borrowed from Doc Martinez, her Winchester rifle secured in its saddle scabbard. She'd changed into practical riding clothes, sturdy, denim and leather boots that could handle rough country, but Clint caught himself stealing glances at the way. Afternoon sunlight caught the copper highlights in her hair. Even in the midst of their grim mission, he found comfort in her presence. "How long since you've been up here?" Kate asked as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail. 15 years. Not since Dad's funeral." The admission came easier than expected. "Samuel and I had our final argument right there." He pointed to a small clearing beside the creek where they'd once built elaborate forts from fallen logs. "I accused him of caring more about rocks and dirt than family relationships. He said I was too stubborn to see past my own hurt feelings. You were both probably right." Her matter-of-fact assessment stung, but Clint recognized the truth in it. The Harrow brothers had been experts at wounding each other with surgical precision, each knowing exactly where the other was most vulnerable. Their father's death had simply provided one final opportunity for mutual destruction. The cabin appeared through the trees like a ghost from another life, a solid log structure their grandfather had built in the 1890s, expanded over the decades into a comfortable 2-bedroom home. Samuel had maintained it well. The roof showed recent repairs, and the wood siding gleamed with fresh stain. But something felt wrong about the scene, an emptiness that went beyond simple abandonment. They dismounted carefully, hands instinctively moving to their weapons. Clint drew his revolver while Kate shouldered her rifle, both scanning the surrounding forest for signs of watchers. The silence was too complete. No birds singing, no small animals rustling in the underbrush, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. "Door's been forced," Kate observed, pointing to splintered wood around the frame. Clint nodded, noting the fresh gouges where someone had used a crowbar or similar tool. "Recent too? Wood chips are still light-colored." He approached the entrance cautiously, listening for any sounds from within the cabin. "Samuel, if you were hiding evidence, where would you put it?" The interior had been systematically ransacked, but not randomly destroyed. Furniture was overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied, but nothing seemed broken out of spite or rage. This was a professional search conducted by people who knew what they were looking for and had time to be thorough. "They were looking for something specific," Kate murmured, stepping carefully around scattered papers and clothing. Not just vandalism. Clint moved through rooms that held 40 years of memories, seeing his childhood in the family photographs that lay scattered across the floor. Here was a picture of him and Samuel at ages 8 and 10, proudly displaying a string of trout they'd caught in the creek. There was their father teaching them to split firewood, both boys straining to lift the heavy axe. Samuel had kept every family photo, even the ones that included Clint. In Samuel's bedroom, they found evidence of the search's intensity. The mattress had been sliced open, its stuffing scattered across the floor. Floorboards had been pried up and examined, then carelessly replaced. Even the stone fireplace had been partially dismantled, rocks pulled loose and stacked nearby. What could be worth this much effort? Kate wondered, running her fingers along the damaged walls. "I think I know." Clint moved to the cabin's back wall, where a framed map of the local mining district hung askew. Behind it he found what he was looking for, a small wall safe, its door hanging open, contents removed. "Dad installed this when we were kids. Said every man needed a place to keep his important papers." Kate joined him in examining the empty safe. "What do you think was in there?" "Property deeds, mining claims, maybe insurance papers." Clint paused, remembering something from Samuel's journal entries. But Samuel mentioned finding Dad's old journal. If our father really did know about hidden silver deposits, he might have kept detailed records. They continued searching, looking for anything the intruders might have missed. In the kitchen pantry, behind rows of canned goods, Kate discovered a loose board in the wall. Her probing fingers found a narrow gap that might have concealed documents. "Clint, look at this." She held up a folded piece of paper that had fallen behind the loose board, apparently overlooked during the search. It was a hand-drawn map in their father's distinctive script, showing the family mining claim, with detailed notations and measurements. The map revealed something Clint had never known existed, a second entrance to the mine, marked as the back door in their father's careful handwriting. Notes along the margins described geological formations and ore samples. But most intriguingly, there were recent additions in Samuel's handwriting. "New digging? Shaft extends 200 feet deeper than we knew," Samuel had written in pencil beside the main tunnel. "Equipment stored in natural chamber, accessed through back entrance. Someone's been working this claim for months, maybe years." Kate studied the map intently. "If someone's been secretly mining your family's silver, they'd need equipment and storage space. This back entrance would let them work without being seen from the main road, and Samuel figured it out." Clint folded the map carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket beside the journal pages. "The question is, how did they know the silver was there in the first place?" A new sound reached them. Horses approaching through the forest, moving at a steady pace rather than the casual gait of casual travelers. Clint and Kate exchanged glances, both recognizing the potential danger. "Back window," Clint whispered. Moving quickly through the cabin, they slipped out the rear of the building and made their way toward the tree line, where their own horses waited. Through the pines, Clint could see 3 riders approaching the cabin. Hard-looking men, with the confident bearing of professionals. One of them matched Samuel's journal description, a scar across his left cheek, expensive clothing that looked out of place in the Montana wilderness. The lead rider dismounted and examined the cabin's entrance. calling out in a voice that carried clearly through the mountain air, "Anyone here?" His accent was definitely urban, possibly eastern. "We're looking for Sheriff Harrow. Got some business to discuss." Clint's blood ran cold. These men knew he was investigating Samuel's death and had come prepared for a confrontation. The fact that they'd found the cabin so quickly suggested local knowledge. Someone in Perdition Ridge was feeding them information. "Sheriff, we know you're here," the scarred man continued. "Your horse has left fresh tracks on the trail. No point hiding, we just want to talk." Kate touched Clint's arm, pointing deeper into the forest. A narrow deer path led uphill toward the ridge, where the old mine entrance lay hidden among granite outcroppings. If they could reach that position, they'd have better cover and a strategic advantage. They began moving carefully through the trees, leading their horses and trying to avoid making noise. Behind them, the three men were systematically searching the cabin and its immediate surroundings, their voices carrying fragments of conversation. Nothing here worth finding. "Boss wants those documents. Check the mine shaft." Clint's worst fears were confirmed. These weren't random criminals or opportunistic thieves. They were part of an organized operation with specific objectives, and they knew about the mine's significance. Samuel's investigation had uncovered something big enough to justify murder and ongoing surveillance. As they climbed higher into the mountains, following paths they'd learned as children, Clint reflected on the irony of the situation. 20 years of estrangement had ended with him literally following in Samuel's footsteps, retracing his brother's final investigation and facing the same dangers that had ultimately killed him. The mine lay another half-mile ahead, hidden in a natural amphitheater of granite walls, where their father had blasted his way into the mountain's secrets. Whatever Samuel had discovered down there, whatever treasure or conspiracy had cost him his life, Clint was determined to uncover the truth, even if that truth proved as dangerous to him as it had been to his brother. The entrance to the Harrow family mine hadn't changed much in 15 years, though the heavy wooden door their father had installed now hung askew on rusted hinges. Clint remembered helping to hang that door as a 12-year-old, holding the massive iron hardware while his father cursed in Norwegian, and Samuel provided unhelpful commentary from his perch on a nearby boulder. "Looks like someone's been using this place regularly," Gate observed, pointing to fresh wheel ruts in the dirt leading to the mine entrance. "Those tracks are recent, maybe a week old." Clint knelt to examine the tire impressions, noting their size and tread pattern. "A heavy truck, probably a pickup with a full load. Someone's been hauling equipment in and silver ore out." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "The question is how long this has been going on." The mine tunnel extended into the mountain at a gentle downward slope, supported by timber beams their grandfather had installed over a century ago. Clint's flashlight beam revealed fresh gouges in the tunnel walls where modern power tools had been used, along with electrical cables that definitely hadn't been there during his childhood explorations. "This is way beyond what Samuel could have done alone," Kate whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Someone's been running a full-scale operation down here." 20 feet into the tunnel, they discovered the first piece of modern mining equipment, a hydraulic drill mounted on wheels, still connected to a portable generator by heavy-duty extension cords. The machine was worth thousands of dollars, far more than any casual prospector could afford. "Professional grade," Clint noted, running his hand along the drill's steel frame. "This is the kind of equipment mining companies use, not weekend treasure hunters." They continued deeper into the mountain, following the original tunnel that Clint remembered from childhood adventures. But after 100 feet, the passage branched off in a direction he'd never seen before, a newly excavated shaft that angled sharply downward into darkness. "Dad always said there might be more silver deeper in the mountain," Clint murmured, studying the fresh excavation. "Looks like someone took him seriously." The new tunnel was a marvel of modern mining technique, with proper ventilation shafts and reinforced walls that spoke of serious engineering expertise. Whoever had been working here understood both geology and construction, suggesting a well-funded operation rather than simple claim jumping. Kate's flashlight illuminated something that made them both freeze, a natural chamber that had been converted into a storage depot. Stacks of silver ore samples filled one wall, while mining equipment worth tens of thousands of dollars occupied the rest of the space. But most disturbing were the detailed geological surveys spread across a makeshift table, showing mineral deposits throughout the Harrow family claim. Jesus, Kate breathed. There's enough silver down here to make someone very wealthy. Clint picked up one of the surveys, noting the professional quality of the documentation. These weren't amateur prospecting reports. They were the kind of detailed analyses that major mining corporations commissioned before making significant investments. Someone had been systematically mapping the underground wealth of his family's land, probably for months or even years. A loose sheet of paper caught his attention, a handwritten note in Samuel's distinctive script. They know about the Eastern Vein. Dad was right about the cursed silver. Some things should stay buried. If something happens to me, check the safe deposit box at First Mountain Bank, key hidden behind loose stone in mine office fireplace. Clint's hands trembled as he read his brother's words. Samuel had known he was in danger, had even prepared for his own death by leaving this final clue. The safe deposit box might contain the evidence they needed to expose whoever had killed him. "We need to get out of here," Kate said suddenly, her voice tight with alarm. "I hear voices." The sound of men's voices echoed from the mine entrance, growing louder as their pursuers approached. Clint quickly gathered the most important documents from the table, stuffing them into his jacket while Kate extinguished her flashlight. "The back entrance," he whispered. Dad's map showed another way out. They moved deeper into the mine, using their knowledge of the tunnel system to navigate by touch and memory. Behind them, flashlight beams began probing the darkness as their hunters entered the mountain. The back entrance proved to be exactly where their father's map indicated, a narrow opening, concealed behind a natural rock formation. It emerged onto a steep hillside, 50 yards from the main mine entrance, invisible to anyone approaching from the primary trail. But as they prepared to leave the mine, Clint heard something that made his blood run cold, the distinctive sound of dynamite being prepared. The men weren't just searching the mine. They were planning to seal it permanently, eliminating any evidence of their activities along with anyone who might be trapped inside. "Move," he hissed, pushing Kate toward the back entrance. They emerged into afternoon sunlight just as the first explosion rocked the mountain. The main mine entrance collapsed in a thunderous avalanche of rock and timber, sealing the tunnel system that had been in the Harrow family for 3 generations. From their vantage point on the hillside, they could see the 3 men below, satisfied with their destruction. The scarred leader was speaking into a radio, probably reporting the successful elimination of evidence. "Took care of the mine." His voice drifted up through the mountain air. "No one's getting in there now." Kate grabbed Clint's arm, her face pale with shock. "They would have killed us both, just like they killed Samuel." The reality of their narrow escape hit him like a physical blow. If they hadn't found the back entrance, if they hadn't moved quickly enough, they would have died in that collapsing tunnel. Samuel's investigation had uncovered a conspiracy worth multiple murders. As the 3 riders departed, confident in their success, Clint studied the documents he'd salvaged from the mine. The geological surveys revealed silver deposits worth millions of dollars, far more than anyone had imagined. But more importantly, they were signed by a consulting firm based in Denver, with recent dates that proved the secret mining operation had been active for at least 2 years. "Samuel figured out they were stealing from our family," Clint said grimly. "All that silver they've been extracting belonged to us. Dad knew it was down there, but he chose not to mine it for reasons we may never understand, and now they've sealed the mine to hide the evidence of their theft." Kate's voice carried a mixture of anger and determination. "What do we do now?" Clint folded the geological surveys carefully, securing them in his jacket. "We go to First Mountain Bank and see what Samuel left in that safe deposit box. If my brother was half as smart as I remember, he documented everything before they killed him. The ride back to town took on the urgency of a race against time. Somewhere in Perdition Ridge was someone feeding information to the criminal operation, someone who knew about their investigation and was reporting their movements. Samuel's death had been just the beginning. Now, Clint and Kate were marked for elimination as well, but Samuel had prepared for this possibility, leaving behind clues that might expose the entire conspiracy. The safe deposit box key hidden in the mine office fireplace represented his final gift to the brother he'd never stopped loving. Despite 20 years of stubborn silence, as they descended the mountain trails toward town, Clint reflected on the bitter irony of the situation. He'd finally found his way back to Samuel, but only by following a path of violence and deception that had already claimed his brother's life. The silver that had divided them in life might yet provide the means to honor Samuel's memory in death, if Clint could survive long enough to expose the truth. The ride back to Perdition Ridge felt like a funeral procession, with the destroyed mine behind them and an uncertain future ahead. Clint's mind churned with questions that had no easy answers. Who in town was feeding information to the criminals? How long had the secret mining operation been active? And most importantly, how many people were involved in the conspiracy that had killed Samuel? First Mountain Bank occupied a corner building on Main Street, its brick facade a testament to the town's more prosperous past. Margaret Holbrook had been the bank manager for 15 years. A precise woman in her 60s who treated every financial transaction with the gravity of a sacred ritual. Sheriff Harrow, she greeted him with surprise as he and Kate entered the bank just before closing time. "I haven't seen you in here for months. How can I help you?" "I need to access a safe deposit box that belonged to my brother." "Samuel." Clint produced the key he'd retrieved from the mine office fireplace, a small brass key with the number 247 etched into its surface. "I'm his next of kin." Margaret's expression grew somber. "Of course. I was very sorry to hear about Samuel's passing. Such a tragedy to lose someone so young." She led them through the formal procedures, checking identification and paperwork with her usual thoroughness. "He was in here quite frequently in his final months, always very concerned about keeping his important documents secure." The safe deposit box was larger than Clint had expected, requiring both his key and Margaret's master key to open. Inside, they found a treasure trove of evidence that Samuel had painstakingly assembled: photographs, documents, recordings, and a detailed journal chronicling his investigation into the illegal mining operation. Samuel was thorough, Kate observed, spreading the contents across the bank's private viewing table. He documented everything. The photographs were particularly damning, clear images of the mining equipment being moved into the mountain under cover of darkness, faces of the men involved in the operation, and even license plates of vehicles used to transport stolen silver ore. Samuel had conducted surveillance for weeks, building an airtight case against his killers, but the most shocking discovery was a series of legal documents proving that Mayor Harold Thompson had been secretly negotiating to sell mineral rights to the Harrow family claim. The papers showed a complex web of shell companies and dummy corporations designed to obscure the true ownership of the mining operation. "Thompson," Clint growled, his hands clenching into fists. "That bastard was working with them from the beginning." A handwritten letter in Samuel's careful script provided the final pieces of the puzzle. "If you're reading this, they've probably killed me. The mayor has been taking bribes to facilitate illegal mining on our family's land. The operation is backed by Denver interests, a mining consortium called Silver Mountain Development. They've been extracting ore for 2 years, stealing millions of dollars worth of silver that rightfully belongs to the Harrow family. I've documented everything, but I'm running out of time. They know I'm onto them, and I don't think they'll let me live long enough to expose their crimes. The evidence is all here. Use it to get justice for our family and restore honor to Dad's memory." Kate's face had gone pale as she read through the documents. "Clint, this is a federal case. We're talking about organized fraud. theft of mineral resources, conspiracy, and murder. This goes way beyond what the local sheriff's office can handle, which is exactly why they thought they could get away with it. Clint gathered the evidence carefully, his mind already formulating a plan. Small-town sheriff, isolated mountain location, local officials on their payroll. It was the perfect setup for grand theft. A coded telegram among Samuel's papers caught his attention. It was addressed to Thompson and signed with the initials SMD, presumably Silver Mountain Development. The message was brief but chilling. Harrow situation becoming problematic. Recommend permanent solution before he contacts federal authorities. The telegram was dated November 25th. Just 3 days before Samuel's death, they ordered his assassination, Clint said quietly, his voice thick with suppressed rage. Thompson gave them the go-ahead to kill my brother. Margaret Holbrook appeared in the doorway of the viewing room, her face apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're closing in 5 minutes. Will you be taking the box contents with you?
Yes, ma'am.
We'll need copies of everything for our records. Clint began securing the evidence in a leather satchel Samuel had thoughtfully included. Mrs. Holbrook, did my brother ever mention feeling threatened or concerned for his safety? The bank manager considered the question carefully. Not in so many words, but he did seem increasingly anxious during his last few visits. He asked about our security procedures, whether safe deposit boxes were confidential, that sort of thing. I got the impression he was worried about someone trying to access his private affairs. As they left the bank, Clint's mind raced with the implications of Samuel's evidence. The conspiracy involved federal crimes that demanded federal investigation. But contacting outside authorities would take time and might alert the criminals to evacuate before justice. It could be served. We need to be very careful about who we trust, he told Kate as they walked toward the sheriff's office. If Thompson is involved, there might be others. This conspiracy could reach deeper into the community than we realize. Kate nodded grimly. What about Doc Martinez? You've known him for decades. Surely he's trustworthy. I hope so. We'll need medical expertise to prove Samuel was murdered, and Roberto is the only doctor within 50 miles. Clint paused at the office door, suddenly aware of how exposed they were on the main street. But first, I need to secure this evidence somewhere safe. If anything happens to us, someone needs to know what we've discovered. The sheriff's office felt different now, no longer a sanctuary, but a potential trap. If Thompson was feeding information to the criminals, he might have access to law enforcement communications and resources. Every phone call, every official report could be monitored and reported to Samuel's killers. Clint locked the evidence in his personal safe, then sat down to write a detailed summary of their discoveries. If he and Kate were eliminated, the next sheriff would at least have a starting point for continued investigation. Samuel spent months building this case, he said as he worked. He knew the risks, but he was determined to protect our family's legacy and expose the truth. I'm not going to let his sacrifice be in vain. Kate moved to the window, keeping watch on the street outside. Those men from the mine will report back to their superiors that the evidence is destroyed. They might think they're safe now, which gives us a temporary advantage. Clint sealed his written summary in an envelope addressed to the state attorney general. They don't know Samuel was smart enough to hide backup documentation. As far as they're concerned, the threat died with him and was buried when they collapsed the mine. The setting sun cast long shadows across Main Street as they prepared for what might be their final night in Perdition Ridge. Tomorrow, they would confront Mayor Thompson and demand answers about his role in Samuel's murder. They would also contact federal authorities and turn over Samuel's evidence to investigators who had the resources to pursue justice. But tonight, they had to survive long enough to see morning. Somewhere in the growing darkness, the men who had killed Samuel were planning their next move, confident that they had eliminated all evidence of their crimes. They were about to discover that the Harrow family was far from defeated, and that Samuel's ghost would not rest until his killers faced justice. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. Clint had spent the night in his office, dozing fitfully in the chair behind his desk, while Kate kept watch from the copper dollar across the street. Every shadow seemed to harbor potential threats. Every unexpected sound made him reach for his weapon. The evidence from Samuel's safe deposit box lay spread across his desk like pieces of an elaborate puzzle. Photographs, documents, recordings that painted a picture of systematic theft and murder. But the most damning piece was a small audio recording device Samuel had hidden during one of his final encounters with the criminal operation. Clint played the recording again, listening to his brother's voice for the first time in 20 years. Samuel sounded older, more cautious than the headstrong young man Clint remembered, but his determination was unmistakable. November 27th evening. They came to the cabin again today, 3 men, including the one with the scar. This time they weren't asking politely. The scarred man, who calls himself Morrison, made it clear that I either sell them the mining rights or face the consequences. When I refused, he smiled and said accidents happen to hermits in the mountains. They're planning something, and I don't think I have much time left. The recording continued, with details about the criminal organization's structure and operations. Morrison appeared to be the field commander, taking orders from someone called the Denver contact. Most disturbing was Samuel's discovery that Mayor Thompson had been facilitating the entire operation from the beginning. Thompson provided them with detailed geological surveys from the county records, surveys that showed exactly where the richest silver deposits were located. He's been taking payments for 2 years, probably $10,000 or more. The man sold out his own community for money. Kate appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a grim expression. "I've been thinking about this all night," she said, setting the coffee on his desk. "If we confront Thompson directly, we might spook him into running. But if we don't act soon, they might realize the mine collapse didn't destroy all the evidence." Clint sipped the coffee gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through his tired body. "There's something else we need to consider." Samuel's recording mentions surveillance equipment, hidden cameras and listening devices he placed around his property. If any of that equipment survived the mine collapse, it might contain footage of his actual murder. "You think they killed him at the cabin?" Doc Martinez found him in his bed, apparently dead of a heart attack. But what if they forced him to swallow something that would cause cardiac arrest, then arranged the scene to look natural? Clint pulled out a photograph from Samuel's collection, a clear image of Morrison and 2 associates near the cabin. These men had access to his property and the medical knowledge to stage a murder. Kate studied the photograph intently. "That smaller man in the background, I've seen him before. He was in the saloon about a month ago, asking questions about the Harrow family. And the old mining claims, the recognition, sent a chill through Clint. The criminal operation had been conducting reconnaissance in town for weeks before Samuel's death, gathering information about the family and identifying potential obstacles to their plans. We need those surveillance recordings, Clint decided. If Samuel documented his own murder, we'll have evidence that even federal investigators can't ignore. They spent the morning planning their approach to the cabin, knowing that the site might still be under surveillance. The criminal operation couldn't be certain that Samuel's evidence had been destroyed, which meant they might be watching for anyone who tried to continue his investigation. Doc Martinez joined them at the sheriff's office, bringing his medical expertise and deep concern about the implications of Samuel's death. If you're right about induced cardiac arrest, there are several substances that could cause that effect. Most of them would be virtually undetectable after cremation, which explains the rush to dispose of the body. Thompson insisted on cremation, Kate added. Said it was more economical for the county, but now we know his real motivation. Roberto Martinez had been town doctor long enough to recognize the signs of a cover-up. Samuel was in good health when I last examined him 6 months ago. No history of heart problems, normal blood pressure, excellent physical condition for a man his age. A sudden cardiac arrest would have been highly unusual. The medical assessment confirmed what Clint had suspected. Samuel's death had been murder disguised as natural causes. But proving it would require evidence that the killers had gone to great lengths to destroy. There's something else, Doc Martinez continued. Thompson approached me after Samuel's death, asking detailed questions about the examination and whether I'd noticed anything unusual. At the time, I thought he was just being thorough, but now it seems like he was checking to make sure the murder hadn't been detected. The web of conspiracy was becoming clearer, but it also seemed to be tightening around them. Thompson wasn't just a corrupt official taking bribes. He was an active participant in murder and cover-up, someone who would kill again to protect his secrets. Clint made his decision. We go back to the cabin this afternoon, but we approach from the north through the old logging trails. If Samuel's surveillance equipment is still functioning, it might have recorded everything that happened during his final days. Kate nodded grimly. And if we find evidence of murder? Then we contact the FBI and turn over everything we've discovered. This goes way beyond local law enforcement. We're dealing with organized crime and federal offenses. As they prepared for their second journey to the mountain cabin, Clint reflected on the strange turns his life had taken in just 2 days. He'd gone from being a small-town sheriff dealing with routine problems to investigating a conspiracy that reached from Denver boardrooms to the depths of his family's silver mine. Samuel had died protecting secrets that were worth millions of dollars, but more than that, he died defending the family legacy that their father had tried so hard to preserve. The cursed silver Henrik Harrow had warned about wasn't cursed by supernatural forces. It was cursed by human greed and the violence that inevitably followed great wealth. The afternoon sun was slanting through the office, windows when Mayor Thompson appeared at the door, his considerable bulk filling the frame and his face showing signs of nervous strain. Sheriff, I heard you've been asking questions about Samuel's death. I hope you're not disturbing the grieving process with unnecessary speculation. Thompson's voice carried a forced casualness that didn't match his worried expression. Just following up on some loose ends, Harold. Nothing that should concern you unless you know something I don't. The mayor's eyes darted around the office, noting the scattered papers and evidence materials. Some folks in town are saying you think Samuel was murdered. That's a serious accusation to make without proof. What makes you think I don't have proof? Thompson's face went pale, confirming what Clint had already suspected. The mayor knew exactly why Samuel had died and was desperate to determine how much the sheriff had discovered. I just meant that you shouldn't upset people with wild theories. Samuel died of natural causes. Doc Martinez confirmed it. Sometimes we have to accept that bad things happen without looking for conspiracies. Kate stepped forward, her green eyes blazing with controlled anger. Like how bad things happened to the Harrow family's silver mine? Like how valuable minerals just disappeared from their property without explanation? Thompson took an involuntary step backward, his guilt written clearly across his face. I don't know what you're implying, but I've always had the highest respect for the Harrow family. Enough respect to sell out their mineral rights to criminals from Denver. Clint's voice was deadly quiet. Enough respect to facilitate the theft of millions of dollars worth of silver. The mayor's composure cracked completely. You don't understand the pressures I was under. The town was dying. We needed investment, development opportunities. So you betrayed your neighbors and got Samuel murdered. Kate's words hit like physical blows. How much did they pay you, Harold? What was Samuel's life worth? Thompson looked around desperately, as if seeking an escape route that didn't exist. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Samuel was supposed to sell his claim voluntarily, relocate somewhere else. His death was what? Clint stood slowly, his hand resting on his service weapon. An accident? A natural coincidence? Or did you give the order yourself? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, heavy with 20 years of buried truth and 2 days of shocking revelations. In that moment, Thompson's face showed the full weight of his guilt and the terrible fear of a man who had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. Whatever happened next, Clint knew that the peaceful existence of Perdition Ridge was over forever. Samuel's ghost had returned to demand justice, and the reckoning would shake the foundations of everything the community thought it knew about itself. Thompson's confession came in broken fragments, each word falling like stones into still water. They said they just wanted to lease the mining rights, that Samuel would be compensated fairly. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. His hands shook as he reached into his jacket, producing a thick envelope. This is everything. All the payments, all the correspondence, all the documents they made me falsify. But as Clint reached for the envelope, Thompson's expression suddenly changed. His fear transformed into something that looked almost like relief, and he glanced toward the office window with an odd smile. I'm sorry it had to come to this, Sheriff, but some secrets are too valuable to stay buried. The realization hit Clint like a physical blow. Thompson wasn't confessing out of guilt. He was stalling, keeping them in place while something else happened. The envelope was a trap, the confession a performance designed to buy time. Kate, get down! Clint dove toward her as the office windows exploded inward, glass fragments flying like deadly rain. Thompson threw himself behind the filing cabinet as armed men poured through the shattered openings, their weapons trained on the sheriff and his companion, Morrison. The scarred man from Samuel's surveillance photos stepped through the front door with the casual confidence of someone who had planned this moment carefully. Sheriff Harrow, you've been asking too many questions about your brother's unfortunate accident. It wasn't an accident, and we both know it. Clint kept his hands visible but ready, calculating distances and angles while trying to shield Kate from the multiple weapons pointed in their direction. Samuel was a stubborn man who refused to see reason. We offered him generous compensation for his mining claim, but he insisted on making everything complicated. Morrison's voice carried no emotion, as if he were discussing a routine business transaction. Sometimes people make poor choices that have unfortunate consequences. Kate spoke from behind the overturned desk where she'd taken cover. You mean sometimes people get murdered by cowards who steal from families? Morrison's laugh was cold and professional. Mrs. Sullivan, I understand you've become romantically involved with the sheriff. How tragic that your relationship will be cut short by the same accident that claimed his brother. The threat crystallized Clint's determination. These men had killed Samuel in cold blood, and now they planned to eliminate everyone who threatened their criminal operation. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed they'd destroyed all the evidence when they collapsed the mine. Before you kill us, Clint said carefully, I think you should know that Samuel was smarter than you gave him credit for. The mine is sealed, Sheriff. Whatever evidence your brother might have hidden is buried under 1,000 tons of rock. Samuel didn't hide his evidence in the mine. Clint's voice carried quiet satisfaction. He hid it somewhere much more secure, somewhere that would guarantee its discovery if anything happened to him. Morrison's confidence wavered slightly. You're lying, am I? Samuel spent months documenting your entire operation. Photographs, recordings, financial records, everything. He knew you were planning to kill him, so he made sure the truth would come out even after his death. The criminal leader exchanged glances with his associates, recognizing the possibility that their careful planning might have overlooked something crucial. Where? Safe deposit box at First Mountain Bank. Federal investigators are probably examining the contents right now. It was a calculated bluff. But Morrison's reaction suggested it might be more accurate than Clint had hoped. Thompson's face went ashen. You said all the evidence was destroyed in the mine collapse. You promised me this would all be over once. Shut up, Harold. Morrison's tone cut through the mayor's panic like a blade. Your usefulness ended when you let this investigation get started. The implication hit Thompson like a physical blow. You're not going to honor our agreement. You're going to kill me, too. You've become a liability. We can't afford loose ends. In that moment of revelation, Clint saw the final piece of the conspiracy's puzzle. Thompson wasn't just a corrupt official taking bribes, he'd been a disposable tool from the beginning. Someone the criminals had always planned to eliminate once his usefulness ended. But Morrison had revealed more than he intended. His casual mention of federal investigators suggested that Samuel's evidence had indeed been discovered, that the conspiracy was already unraveling beyond their ability to control. The FBI has been investigating Silver Mountain development for months. Clint continued his bluff, watching Morrison's face for confirmation. Samuel wasn't working alone. He was cooperating with federal authorities to expose your entire operation. The reaction was immediate and decisive. Morrison's professional composure cracked, revealing the desperation of a man who realized his carefully constructed criminal enterprise was collapsing around him. "Kill them all," he ordered his men. "We clean up this mess and disappear before the Federals arrive." But as the gunmen raised their weapons, the office door burst open again. This time it was Doc Martinez, followed by Kate's bartender and 3 of the town's most respected citizens, all armed and determined to defend their sheriff. "I don't think so," Roberto said firmly. His shotgun trained on Morrison's chest. "We've been listening outside for the past 5 minutes, heard everything about Samuel's murder and the mining conspiracy." The balance of power had shifted dramatically. Morrison and his men found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by angry townspeople who had just learned that their neighbors had been betrayed and murdered for corporate profit. "You have 2 choices," Clint announced, rising from his defensive position. "Surrender peacefully, or find out how Montana mountain folks deal with claim jumpers and murderers." Morrison's scarred face showed the calculations of a professional killer weighing his options. The office was too small for a prolonged gunfight, and his escape routes were blocked by armed citizens who knew the town's layout better than any outsider. "This isn't over, Sheriff. Silver Mountain Development has resources you can't imagine, lawyers and connections that reach into the highest levels of government. Even if you arrest us, we'll be out on bail within hours." "Maybe," Clint agreed. "But Samuel's evidence is already in federal hands, and your entire operation is about to become front-page news across the country. Even your high-level connections won't be able to stop that avalanche." As the criminals were disarmed and restrained, Kate moved to examine the evidence Thompson had produced. The envelope contained exactly what the mayor had promised: detailed records of payments, correspondence with Silver Mountain Development, and falsified documents that had facilitated the theft of millions of dollars worth of silver. But among those papers was something unexpected: a letter addressed to Clint in Samuel's handwriting, dated just 1 week before his death. "Dear little brother," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then I'm probably dead, and our family's legacy is in your hands. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping that we'd find our way back to each other. The fight we had about Dad's mine was never really about silver or money. It was about pride and hurt feelings that we let grow, until they poisoned everything between us." Clint's vision blurred as he read his brother's final words, 20 years of regret and guilt washing over him in overwhelming waves. "I've been working with federal investigators for the past 6 months, helping them build a case against the criminals who've been stealing from our family. They approached me after receiving anonymous tips about illegal mining activities in the area. What they didn't know, what I didn't tell them until recently, is that I suspected our own mayor was involved in the conspiracy." The revelation hit Clint like lightning. Samuel hadn't been a lone investigator stumbling onto a criminal conspiracy. He'd been a federal informant working to expose organized crime. His estrangement from Clint hadn't been personal rejection. It had been protective distance, keeping his brother safe from the dangerous investigation he was conducting. "I stayed away from you, not because I didn't want reconciliation, but because I didn't want you to become a target. These people are killers, Clint, and they wouldn't hesitate to hurt you to get to me. Every day I didn't contact you was a day I kept you safe from the monsters I was hunting." Kate read over his shoulder, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "He was protecting you all along." The letter continued with detailed instructions about evidence locations, federal contact information, and Samuel's hopes for the family's future. But the final paragraph was purely personal, a message from brother to brother across 20 years of silence. "I forgive you for everything, and I hope you can forgive me. We were both too stubborn and too proud to see past our hurt, but that doesn't mean the love ever died." Take care of the dogs if something happens to me. They're good animals who deserve better than the violence that's touched their lives. And Clint, don't let my death be meaningless. Use the evidence I've gathered to get justice for our family and honor Dad's memory. The silver in that mine belongs to the Harrow name, and it's time to reclaim what's rightfully ours. The federal agents arrived in Perdition Ridge like a small army, black SUVs and unmarked sedans filling Main Street. As Special Agent Sarah Chen took command of the investigation. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with sharp intelligence in her dark eyes, and the quiet authority of someone who'd spent years pursuing white-collar criminals. Sheriff Harrow. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said as they met in his office, now crowded with evidence boxes and technical equipment. "Your brother was a brave man who helped us build one of the most significant mining fraud cases in federal history." Clint studied the agent's face, still processing the revelation that Samuel had been working undercover for months. "How long had he been cooperating with your investigation?" 6 months officially, but he'd been feeding us information for almost a year before that. Agent Chen opened a thick file folder filled with surveillance photos and documents. "Samuel first contacted us after noticing suspicious activity around your family's mining claim. What started as a routine tip about possible trespassing evolved into something much larger." Kate leaned forward from her chair beside Clint's desk. "How much larger?" "Silver Mountain Development is a front organization for a multi-state criminal enterprise. They've been systematically targeting abandoned or underworked mining claims throughout the Rocky Mountains, stealing millions of dollars worth of precious metals while bribing local officials to look the other way." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. What Clint had thought was a local crime affecting only his family was actually part of a sophisticated operation that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of corrupt officials. "Samuel's evidence was the breakthrough we needed," Agent Chen continued. "His documentation of the local operation, combined with our broader investigation, gives us everything necessary to dismantle the entire network." But even as they spoke, word arrived that Morrison and his associates had been released on bail, their high-powered attorneys having worked through the night to secure their freedom. The man who had killed Samuel was back on the streets, desperate and dangerous. "We expected this," Agent Chen admitted grimly. "Their organization has deep pockets and excellent legal representation. But bail doesn't mean freedom. We have surveillance teams tracking their every movement." Clint wasn't satisfied with passive observation. "Samuel died because these people thought they could operate with impunity. Now they're going to disappear into witness protection programs or flee the country while lawyers tie up the courts for years. Sheriff, I understand your frustration, but federal investigations take time. We need to build cases that will stand up in court against the best defense attorneys money can buy." The conversation was interrupted by Doc Martinez, who burst through the office door with urgent news. "Clint, they've taken the dogs." "What?" "Someone broke into the back of my clinic where we've been caring for Samuel's wolf dogs. No signs of violence, but both animals are gone. Whoever took them knew exactly what they were doing. Professional job, in and out without leaving traces. The kidnapping of Samuel's loyal companions felt like a personal violation, an attack on the last living connection to his brother. But it was also a tactical move. The criminals were eliminating potential evidence and sending a message about their willingness to escalate violence. They're trying to draw you out, Agent Chen observed. Force you into making emotional decisions instead of logical ones. Kate stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. Those animals didn't do anything except try to save their master's life. What kind of monsters hurt innocent creatures out of spite? The kind that murder hermits for silver deposits, Clint replied grimly. The same kind that bribe mayors and collapse mines to hide evidence. But Agent Chen's next revelation changed everything. Sheriff, there's something else you need to know. Samuel's death wasn't the end of their killing spree. It was just the beginning. We've identified at least 6 other mining claim owners across 3 states who died under suspicious, circumstances after refusing to sell their properties, to Silver Mountain Development. The scope of the criminal enterprise was even more horrifying than Clint had imagined. Samuel's murder was part of a systematic campaign of assassination designed to steal valuable mining claims through intimidation and violence. 6 people, Kate whispered. 6 families destroyed for corporate profit. And those are just the cases we can definitively link to their organization. There may be others we haven't identified yet. Agent Chen's voice carried the weight of professional experience with human evil. Your brother stumbled onto something massive, Sheriff. His evidence doesn't just expose the theft of your family's silver. It reveals a criminal conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of the mining industry. The afternoon sun slanted through the office windows as they planned their next move. Morrison and his associates were free on bail, but their movements were being monitored. The stolen wolfdogs were probably being held somewhere in the mountains, used as bait for a trap designed to eliminate the remaining threats to the criminal organization. We have 2 choices, Agent Chen explained. We can play this safe, build our case methodically over the next 6 months, and hope the defense attorneys don't find technicalities to exploit. Or we force their hand, Clint finished. Make them desperate enough to reveal the full extent of their operation. That's extremely dangerous. You'd essentially be using yourself as bait. Kate grabbed his arm. Clint, you can't seriously be considering Samuel died alone, facing these monsters without backup or support. I won't let his sacrifice be meaningless because we were too cautious to take risks. His decision was made, had been made the moment he'd read his brother's final letter. What do you need me to do? Agent Chen studied his face, recognizing the determination of a man who'd found his purpose. Samuel left one final piece of evidence that we haven't retrieved yet. He hid a waterproof container somewhere in the original mine shaft, in a location that only family members would know about. That container supposedly holds the most damaging evidence against the criminal organization: recordings, photographs, and documents that would guarantee convictions for everyone involved. But the mine is collapsed, sealed under tons of rock. The main entrance is sealed. But your father's map shows that back entrance you used yesterday. If the container is where Samuel claimed to have hidden it, it might still be accessible through the secondary tunnel. The plan was both simple and terrifying. Clint would return to the collapsed mine, ostensibly searching for Samuel's final evidence cache. The criminals would undoubtedly follow, desperate to prevent the discovery of information that could destroy their entire organization. Federal agents would be positioned to capture the killers in the act. But Clint would be alone in the dangerous underground maze until help could reach him. Samuel's service revolver, Agent Chen added, producing a familiar weapon from an evidence box. We found it among his personal effects. He'd want you to carry it during the operation. Clint accepted the gun reverently, feeling the weight of his brother's final gift. The revolver was a Smith & Wesson .38 that Samuel had carried during his military service, cleaned and maintained with the care of a professional soldier. There's something else, Agent Chen continued. The original mining deed for your family's claim. Samuel had it with him when he died, hidden in a secret compartment of his jacket. It proves that everything Silver Mountain Development stole rightfully belonged to the Harrow family. The legal document was more than just paper and ink. It represented 5 generations of family history, the hopes and dreams of immigrants who'd believed in the American promise of opportunity through honest work. Henrik Harrow had claimed this land legally, worked it honorably, and passed it down to sons who'd been too proud to recognize its true value. Tomorrow morning we go back to the mine, Clint announced. We finish what Samuel started, and we make sure these bastards pay for every life they've destroyed. Kate's face showed her fear, but also her determination to see justice done. I'm coming with you. Kate, it's too dangerous. Samuel trusted me with his secrets. I was the last person he spoke to before they killed him. I have as much right to be there as anyone. Her green eyes blazed with the fire of a woman who'd found her cause. Besides, Someone needs to watch your back while you're searching for that evidence container. Agent Chen nodded approvingly. Mrs. Sullivan is right. This is a two-person job at minimum, and she knows the terrain as well as you do. As darkness fell over Perdition Ridge, Clint felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation with the forces that had destroyed Samuel's life. The ultimate test of his ability to honor his brother's memory and protect his family's legacy. The wounded Wolfdogs had started this journey by limping into town with their desperate message. Now it would end where it had begun, in the depths of the Harrow family mine, where 5 generations of hopes and dreams lay buried beneath the silver-veined rock of the Montana mountains. Samuel's ghost would finally find peace, but only if his brother had the courage to face the same dangers that had claimed his life. The pre-dawn darkness clung to the mountain trails like a living thing, broken only by the narrow beams of their flashlights, as Clint and Kate made their way toward the collapsed mine. Federal surveillance teams had confirmed that Morrison and his associates were following, maintaining distance, but closing the trap that would end this deadly game once and for all. Samuel's service revolver rode heavy on Clint's hip, a tangible connection to the brother he'd lost and the justice he was determined to secure. The original mining deed rested in his shirt pocket, pressed against his heart like a talisman of family honor that had survived 5 generations of struggle and sacrifice. "Movement on the ridge," Kate whispered, pointing toward shadows that shifted unnaturally among the pine trees. 3 riders, maybe 4, staying just outside rifle range. Clint nodded grimly. Morrison's team was being cautious, professional in their approach to what they undoubtedly saw as their final opportunity to eliminate the threat posed by Samuel's evidence. They couldn't afford to let the hidden container be discovered, couldn't risk exposure of the criminal conspiracy that had already claimed so many lives. The back entrance to the mine gaped before them like a mouth leading into the underworld. The narrow opening showed no signs of the collapse that had sealed the main tunnel. Samuel's father had chosen his hiding spot well, creating an escape route that would survive even deliberate sabotage. "Last chance to reconsider," Clint offered. Though he knew Kate's determination matched his own, Samuel died protecting family secrets. "I'm not walking away from the chance to honor his sacrifice." Her green eyes reflected the flashlight's glow with fierce resolve. "Besides, those monsters have my wolfdogs. I want them back." They entered the mountain's depths carefully, following the narrow tunnel that angled downward into chambers their father had explored 60 years ago. The air was stale but breathable, heavy with the mineral scent of silver-bearing ore and the accumulated silence of decades. Samuel's hiding place would be somewhere only family members knew about, Clint reasoned aloud. Trying to think like his brother. "Dad used to bring us down here when we were kids, showed us the old passages and warned us about unstable areas." Kate's flashlight illuminated carved initials on the tunnel wall, SH plus CH 1985, surrounded by a rough heart. "You and Samuel carved this?" "Summer before our big fight about the mine's future. We were exploring the deep chambers, making plans about working the claim together when we got older." The memory struck him with unexpected poignancy. "We promised we'd always be partners, always watch each other's backs." The tunnel branched into multiple passages, some leading to worked-out ore veins and others disappearing into the mountain's natural cave system. But Clint remembered one particular chamber that had always fascinated Samuel. A natural cathedral of stone, where their father had told stories about the Norwegian miners who'd first worked these mountains. "This way," he said, leading Kate deeper into the mine's heart. The cathedral chamber was exactly as Clint remembered it, a vast natural space where limestone formations created an underground amphitheater. But now it showed signs of recent activity. Fresh tool marks on the walls and modern equipment scattered across the floor. "Someone's been working here recently," Kate observed, examining a hydraulic drill that must have cost thousands of dollars. But Clint's attention was drawn to a different discovery, a familiar backpack tucked behind a pile of loose stones, positioned where only someone who knew the chamber's layout would think to look. "Samuel's pack," he said, recognizing the worn canvas their brother had carried on childhood camping trips. Inside, he found what they'd come to: retrieve a waterproof container holding the final pieces of evidence that would complete the case against Silver Mountain. Development. The container held a treasure trove of documentation, detailed photographs of the criminal operation, financial records proving the scope of the fraud, and most damning of all, audio recordings of conversations between Morrison and his Denver contacts discussing specific murder contracts. "Jesus," Kate breathed, looking through the photographs. Samuel documented everything. "These pictures show the entire operation, faces, license plates, equipment serial numbers. But as they examined the evidence, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance. Morrison and his team had entered the mine, abandoning caution in their desperation to prevent the evidence from leaving the mountain. "Sheriff Harrow," Morrison's voice carried clearly through the stone passages. "We know you're down there. This doesn't have to end with more violence. Just leave the container and walk away." Clint checked Samuel's revolver, ensuring it was loaded and ready. "Like you let Samuel walk away?" "Your brother was stubborn and idealistic. He couldn't accept that some situations require practical solutions rather than moral absolutes." Morrison's footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by at least 2 other sets of boots. "The mining industry is worth billions of dollars, Sheriff. A few individual lives are acceptable losses in the pursuit of such wealth." Kate positioned herself behind natural stone cover, her rifle trained on the tunnel entrance. "They're coming from multiple directions," she whispered. "I can hear movement in the side passages." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Morrison's team had split up, using their knowledge of the mine's layout to surround the cathedral chamber. Federal backup was somewhere outside the mountain, but too far away to provide immediate assistance. "Samuel made the same mistake you're making," Morrison continued, his voice now coming from the main tunnel entrance. He thought moral righteousness was more powerful than superior firepower and professional training. A gunshot echoed through the chamber as one of Morrison's associates opened fire from a side passage, forcing Clint and Kate to take cover behind the mining equipment. The bullet sparked off stone inches from Kate's head, showering them with granite fragments. "They're trying to pin us down while Morrison reaches the evidence container," Clint realized. He began moving toward the backpack, staying low and using the chamber's natural formations for protection. Another gunshot, this one closer, followed by the distinctive whistle of a ricochet. Morrison's team was closing their net, using covering fire to limit their target's mobility while advancing to secure positions. But as Clint reached for Samuel's backpack, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The distinctive howling of wolves echoing through the stone passages. Morrison had brought the stolen wolfdogs into the mine, probably planning to use them as a final psychological weapon against their former master's family. "You hear that, Sheriff?" Morrison called out. "Your brother's pets are going to watch you die in the same place he hid his precious evidence." The howling grew louder, more desperate, and Clint realized something Morrison hadn't anticipated. The dogs weren't just making noise, they were calling for help, recognizing the scent of family and trying to reach the humans who might save them. Kate's rifle cracked in the enclosed space, answered immediately by return fire from multiple positions. The battle for Samuel's evidence cache had begun in earnest, with the outcome determining whether justice would finally be served or whether the Harrow family's legacy would be buried forever in the depths of their ancestral mine. Samuel's service revolver felt warm in Clint's hand as he prepared for the fight that would decide everything. His brother had died protecting these secrets. Now it was time to discover whether that sacrifice would prove meaningful or whether it would simply claim 2 more lives in the darkness beneath the Montana mountains. The gunfight erupted in earnest as Morrison's men advanced from 3 directions simultaneously, their muzzle flashes creating a deadly strobe light effect in the cathedral chamber's darkness. Clint rolled behind a massive limestone formation, clutching Samuel's evidence container against his chest while bullets sparked off stone inches from his head. Kate's rifle answered with methodical precision, her shots echoing like thunder in the enclosed space. She'd found a defensive position that gave her overlapping fields of fire, forcing Morrison's associates to advance more carefully than they'd planned. "You're only delaying the inevitable," Morrison shouted over the gunfire. "This mine is going to be your tomb, just like it was your brother's." But Clint had noticed something in the chamber's layout that Morrison had missed, the natural acoustics that carried sound throughout the underground passages. The howling of Samuel's dogs wasn't just random noise. It was coming from a specific direction, and it was getting closer. "Kate," he called out during a brief lull in the shooting. "The dogs are loose. They're coming this way." As if summoned by his words, two furry shapes burst into the cathedral chamber from a side passage, moving with the fluid grace of predators despite their healing injuries. Samuel's wolfdogs had somehow escaped their captors and tracked their master's scent to this final confrontation. The larger dog, the one wearing their father's old collar, launched himself at the nearest gunman with shocking ferocity. The man's scream cut through the gunfire as 80 pounds of angry wolfdog drove him to the ground. His weapon clattering away across the stone floor, Morrison spun toward this new threat, giving Clint the opening he'd been waiting for. Samuel's service revolver bucked in his hand, the .38 slug catching Morrison in the shoulder and spinning him around. "That's for Samuel," Clint growled, advancing with his brother's weapon raised. But Morrison wasn't finished. Despite his wound, he managed to raise his own pistol, aiming directly at Kate's position behind the mining equipment. "If I can't have the evidence, nobody can," he snarled. The second wolfdog hit him like a furry missile, jaws clamping down on his gun arm just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, shattering a stalactite that crashed to the chamber floor in a shower of limestone fragments. Kate's rifle spoke one final time, the bullet taking out the last of Morrison's associates who was trying to flank their position. The cathedral chamber fell silent, except for the heavy breathing of exhausted combatants and the satisfied panting of two very loyal dogs. Morrison lay on the stone floor, his shoulder bleeding but not life-threatening. The scar across his left cheek looked pale against his flushed face as he glared up at Clint with unconcealed hatred. "You think this changes anything?" he gasped. "Silver Mountain Development has lawyers and connections you can't imagine. I'll be out on bail again within hours." "Maybe," Clint agreed, kneeling beside the wounded man. "But Samuel's evidence is going to federal prosecutors, and your entire operation is about to become front-page news. Even your high-level connections won't be able to stop that avalanche." Kate emerged from her defensive position, the larger wolfdog padding over to greet her with obvious affection. "These beautiful creatures led us right to you," she said, scratching behind the animal's ears. "Samuel trained them well." The sound of approaching voices echoed through the mine tunnels as federal agents finally reached the underground chamber. Agent Chen appeared at the tunnel entrance, her tactical team spreading out to secure the scene and provide medical assistance to the wounded criminals. "Sheriff Harrow, are you injured?" she called out. "We're fine," Clint replied, though his hands were shaking with adrenaline and emotional exhaustion. "And we found Samuel's final evidence. Cash. The waterproof container held everything Agent Chen had hoped for and more, detailed documentation of the criminal conspiracy that reached from local corruption to corporate boardrooms in Denver. The recordings alone were enough to guarantee convictions for everyone involved in the illegal mining operation. But among the evidence was one final surprise: the original deed to the Harrow family mining claim, along with a geological survey that revealed the true extent of the silver deposits. The mineral wealth that had gotten Samuel killed was worth far more than anyone had imagined, potentially tens of millions of dollars in untapped resources. "Your brother died protecting more than just family honor," Agent Chen observed as she examined the geological survey. This mine contains some of the richest silver veins ever discovered in Montana. No wonder Silver Mountain Development was willing to kill for access to it. As Morrison and his surviving associates were led away in federal custody, Clint found himself alone in the cathedral chamber with Kate and Samuel's two loyal companions. The dogs had settled beside him as if they recognized him as their new pack leader, their golden eyes reflecting the flashlight beams with quiet intelligence. Samuel's letter said to take care of them, Kate reminded him gently. They're family now. The larger dog nudged Clint's hand with his massive head, seeking the attention and affection he'd been denied since his master's death. For 20 years, Clint had convinced himself that he didn't deserve family connections, that his stubborn pride had destroyed his capacity for love and loyalty. But these animals saw past his guilt and regret to the man Samuel had always believed he could become. Someone worthy of trust, protection, and unconditional devotion. What happens now? Kate asked, as they prepared to leave the mine for the final time. Clint looked around the cathedral chamber where his family's destiny had been decided, where Samuel's sacrifice had finally found meaning and purpose. The silver-veined walls that had tempted men to violence and greed would now fund something more valuable, justice for the victims of corporate murder and restoration of honor to the Harrow name. Now, we go home, he said simply. We bury the past and build something better. The original mining deed crinkled in his shirt pocket as they climbed toward daylight. A legal document that represented 5 generations of family history and the dreams of immigrants who'd believed in America's promise of opportunity through honest work. Samuel's evidence would convict the killers and expose the corruption that had nearly destroyed Perdition Ridge. The recovered silver would provide financial security for the community and resources for investigating other suspicious mining deaths across the region. But more than that, his brother's final gift had restored something Clint had thought lost forever: the ability to trust in family bonds that could survive even 20 years of stubborn silence and mutual hurt. As they emerged from the mine into Montana sunlight, followed by Samuel's faithful wolf dogs, Clint felt his brother's presence in the mountain wind that carried the scent of pine trees and the promise of redemption. 3 months later, Clint sat on the porch of Samuel's cabin, his cabin now, watching the sunrise paint the Montana mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The larger of Samuel's wolf dogs lay at his feet, the animal's massive head resting across his boots in a gesture of absolute trust and devotion. His companion dozed nearby, both creatures having healed from their wounds and found peace in their new home. The trials had concluded faster than anyone expected. Morrison's conviction on federal conspiracy and murder charges had triggered a cascade of plea bargains and cooperation agreements that dismantled Silver Mountain Development completely. Mayor Thompson faced 20 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy, while 6 other corrupt officials across 3 states had been arrested and charged with related crimes. Kate emerged from the cabin carrying 2 cups of coffee and the morning newspaper, her auburn hair catching the early light. She'd moved to the mountain permanently after selling the copper dollar to Doc Martinez's nephew, trading the responsibilities of running a saloon for the quieter satisfactions of helping Clint restore his family's legacy. Federal prosecutors announced 3 more arrests yesterday, she said, settling into the chair beside his. Looks like Samuel's evidence is still bearing fruit. The newspaper's headline read, "Mining fraud investigation expands to 7 states," with Samuel's photograph prominently featured as the federal informant whose courage had exposed the entire criminal conspiracy. His brother's sacrifice had become a symbol of individual integrity, standing against corporate corruption, inspiring other victims to come forward with their own stories of intimidation and theft. Agent Chen called yesterday, Clint said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The Federal Victim Compensation Fund approved our application. The government's going to help us reopen the mine, using legitimate mining techniques and environmental safeguards. It was more than financial restitution. It was recognition that the Harrow family deserved justice for 5 generations of honest work and the murder of a man who died protecting their legacy. The silver deposits Samuel had documented would provide sustainable income for decades, but more importantly, they would be extracted honorably, without violence or corruption. The larger Wolfdog lifted his head at the sound of an approaching vehicle, tail wagging in recognition. Doc Martinez's pickup truck navigated the winding mountain road with the careful precision of someone who'd made this journey many times over the past months. "Morning. You too," Roberto called out as he climbed from the cab. "Brought those medical reports you requested." "Clint, the documents confirmed what they'd all suspected. Samuel's death showed clear evidence of poisoning by a rare cardiac toxin that would be virtually undetectable without specific testing. Morrison's organization had used the same method to murder at least 4 other mining claim owners, perfecting their technique for staging natural-looking deaths. Justice delayed, but not denied, Doc Martinez observed, settling into a third porch chair. Samuel's killers will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, and their victims' families finally have the truth. The morning was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, Agent Chen's government sedan, following the same winding road that had become a regular pathway for federal investigators. But today her visit was personal rather than professional. A final report on the case that had consumed 18 months of her life. "Sheriff, Mrs. Sullivan," she greeted them with the warm familiarity of someone who'd shared danger and triumph. "I have news that I think you'll want to hear." The federal investigation had identified 17 victims of Silver Mountain Development's murder-for-profit scheme, with total theft exceeding $40 million in stolen mineral resources. Samuel's evidence had been the keystone that brought down an organization responsible for more deaths than any mining-related crime in American history. "Your brother's courage saved dozens of lives," Agent Chen told Clint. "Without his willingness to work undercover, this conspiracy might have continued for years." But she'd brought more than just statistics and legal updates. From her briefcase, she produced a leather portfolio containing the complete file of Samuel's federal cooperation, including recordings and photographs that showed the full extent of his heroism. "He was scared," she admitted. "Samuel knew they were planning to kill him, knew that every day of his investigation brought him closer to death. But he never wavered, never considered backing down or fleeing to safety." The recordings revealed Samuel's voice in conversations with federal handlers, discussing strategy and sharing intelligence while the walls closed in around him. His love for his family, his determination to protect Clint from the danger, and his hope for eventual reconciliation came through clearly in every word. "He talked about you constantly," Agent Chen continued, "worried that his investigation was putting you at risk, but also hopeful that solving the case might give you both a chance to rebuild your relationship." Clint's throat tightened with emotion he'd thought exhausted months ago. Even in his final weeks, facing death from professional killers, Samuel had been thinking about his little brother's safety and happiness. Kate took his hand gently, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture of comfort and shared understanding. They'd found love in the midst of tragedy, built hope from the ashes of violence and loss. "There's something else," Agent Chen added, producing a small wooden box from her briefcase. "Samuel's personal effects from his federal safe house. He wanted you to have these if anything happened to him." Inside the box were treasures from their shared childhood, the fishing lures they'd carved together as boys, photographs from family camping trips, a pocket knife their father had given Samuel for his 13th birthday. But most precious of all was a letter addressed to Clint in his brother's handwriting, dated just 1 week before his death. "My dearest little brother," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then my dangerous game is over, and it's time for you to know the truth. I've been working undercover for the federal government, helping them investigate the criminals who've been stealing from our family's mine. I couldn't tell you because I was afraid they'd hurt you to get to me. But I need you to know that every day of silence was an act of love. not rejection. The letter continued with details about the federal investigation, Samuel's fears and hopes, and his dreams for their family's future. But the final paragraph was purely personal, a message of love and forgiveness that transcended 20 years of stubborn silence. I forgive you for everything, and I hope you can forgive me. We were both too proud and too hurt to see past our anger, but that doesn't mean the love died. It just got buried under layers of stubbornness and regret. I'm proud of the man you've become, proud of the way you've served your community with honor and integrity. Take care of the dogs, take care of the mine, and most of all, take care of yourself. You deserve happiness, Clint. You deserve love and family, and all the good things Dad wanted for both of us. As Clint finished reading, the larger wolf dog moved closer, pressing against his leg with the intuitive understanding that only animals possess. These creatures had carried Samuel's final message through miles of dangerous country, had survived violence and abandonment to deliver their master's last gift of reconciliation. The cabin that had once represented 20 years of separation now stood as a symbol of restored family bonds and honored sacrifice. Samuel's presence filled every room, not as a ghost demanding vengeance, but as a brother offering forgiveness and hope for the future. "What will you do now?" Agent Chen asked as she prepared to leave. Clint looked around at the mountain landscape that held 5 generations of Harrow family history, at Kate, whose love had helped him find his way back to himself, at the loyal animals who'd chosen to trust him with their devotion. "We're going to reopen the mine the right way," he said simply. "Create jobs for the community, extract the silver honorably, and make sure Samuel's sacrifice leads to something good and lasting." The federal agent smiled and shook his hand firmly. "Your brother would be proud." As her sedan disappeared down the mountain road, Clint found himself alone with Kate and the dogs on the porch, where Samuel had spent his final months. The silence was comfortable now, filled with the sounds of wind through pine trees and the distant call of mountain birds. "Any regrets?" Kate asked softly. Clint considered the question seriously, thinking about 20 years of estrangement, the violence that had brought them together, and the uncertain future they were building from the wreckage of tragedy. "Only that it took so long to find our way back to each other," he said finally. "Samuel and I, you and I, even these dogs finding their way to a new family." The larger wolf dog's tail thumped against the porch boards as if he understood and approved. These animals had lost their first master to violence and greed, but they'd found new purpose in protecting and loving the humans who'd honored their sacrifice. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the mountain clearing, Clint reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment of peace. 2 wounded wolf dogs limping into town with a desperate message had changed everything, setting in motion events that exposed corruption, delivered justice, and ultimately restored his faith in the bonds that make life worth living. Samuel's voice seemed to whisper on the mountain wind, carrying forgiveness and love across 20 years of silence. The silver in the family mine would provide financial security, but the true treasure was the knowledge that love could survive even the deepest wounds, that family bonds could be stronger than pride or fear or the violence of evil men. The wolf dogs had delivered their message and found their reward. Justice had been served, honor had been restored, and the Harrow family legacy would continue for generations yet to come. In the end, that was all any man could hope for, that his life and death would mean something to the people he loved, and that his sacrifice would light the way for others to find their own path to redemption. The Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson as Clint Harrow sat on his brother's porch, surrounded by the family he'd thought lost forever, listening to the silence that spoke of peace finally found.